Hi everyone. In week 8, we are focusing on education policy. So in this first recording, I'll aim to give a brief overview of education policy, and then we shall try to understand how education policy can be linked to the other areas of social policy we have discussed in week 7 and week 6, notably health policy and social security policy. So what is education policy and why does it matter? When we speak about education policy, really, we are thinking of standards, government arrangements, laws, and even principles that govern the operation of education systems. We also recognize how these arrangements, these laws, and these standards get to influence all levels of education, from early childhood to professional trainings, and even to some extent higher education. So we also want to highlight how these arrangements, can involve many ongoing policy debates around classroom size, school size, teaching methods, what should be on the curriculum at different levels of education, and even the overall environment that is deemed necessary for quality education. We also understand that policy debates in the education sector can go beyond these questions listed here to tackle broader, societal questions such as the kind of society we really want and even the type of individuals we want our education system to be producing. So broadly speaking, education policy really involves many different questions like that. Internationally, education is a core focus of the United Nations and even other agencies. In the United Nations frameworks, you'll see education really being clearly and explicitly listed among the Sustainable Development Goals. You know that the Sustainable Development Goals are these 17 interconnected goals that were adopted by the UN member states in 2015 and which aimed at ending poverty, protecting the planet, and ensuring peace and prosperity by 2030. So in a sense, most of these development goals will be evaluated by 2030 to see whether they had been achieved or not. And of course, again, as a reminder, these came to replace what were known previously as the the Millennium Development Goals. So education actually is one of these focus internationally. It's not only an Australian thing, it's an international thing as well. We also recognize how education policy is a social determinant of health. Education is a social determinant of health, but also even a determinant of socio-economic well-being. We shall also try to see how education policy can be linked to social protection. And as we started saying in week 7, actually education is recognized as one of the ways we can get to combat poverty and even foster civic participation and protect people from exclusion and marginalization in the society. You might hear quite often this phrase, which now tends to be kind of a generic phrase in the society, that education is the key. And this is very much repeated in everyday language. See people at community level often using that word. Education is the key for the future, for a brighter future, get to educate your children, and so on and so forth. We also recognize this in policy and research development. Actually, I can't remember any research study I read or any research study I'd written myself where education was not part of the solutions which were being suggested. Many of the issues we are working with at policy level, at practice level, and even in research, many of the times education tends to be one of the things we bring as a recommendation. many different ways, and we can speak to this as we go to, how education can get to address different problems, or how education can be even a prevention to complex forms of, social problems, such as poverty, such as, social disadvantage, and, how we get even to prevent some diseases through educating people to, different ways of dealing with that. So in a sense, education is really a recommendation. Even internationally, we have the UNESCO, which is a UN's agency in charge of education and, cultural thing, which again set up some international standards, and which gets to really suggest how education again is a core human right. And we shall come back to this idea of education as a human right later in this week's workbooks and lectures. In this week's core reading, Hinz, whose main textbook we are using in this week, highlights how higher levels of education are correlated with better physical and mental health, higher earnings, and reduced incidence of unemployment, and even lower rates of crime. And Hinz goes on to say that education also translates to higher workplace productivity and higher rates of economic growth, and that schools can also promote greater civic and social engagement. Again, this is just corroborating, how important education is to many aspects of life, including health, including socioeconomic well-being, including, even the well-being of the society as a whole. Education remains an important element to those. But let's now briefly speak about education as a social determinant of health. So, as we started saying, education can function as a social determinant of health in many ways. And as we said last week, in week 6, when we discussed about, the social determinant of health, we mentioned actually education as a core social determinant of health. And it might influence health in many ways. If you look in detail to this reading from Dahlgren and Whitehead, you might see, how they frame education as a core social determinant of health, including how higher levels of education improve health literacy and enabling people to make informed health decisions and navigating healthcare effectively. A few other things, such as education increasing access to better job opportunities and income, which support access to quality housing, healthcare, nutrition, food, and so on and so forth. And also how early childhood education actually and quality schooling fosters mental health and physical development, which can equally reduce risky behaviors and lead to improved long-term health outcomes like lower rates of chronic diseases and greater life expectancies. So there are points like that really we might want to unpack more as to, and even make the case as to why and how education is a core social determinant of health. But briefly speaking, it is recognized as such, and there are so many good reasons why education would be regarded as a core social determinant of health. Just again, really to show you how this week's content can be linked to week 6 content, but it can be even linked to week 7's content when we spoke about social protection and social security. So, as a key element of, social protection, education gets to prevent social exclusion and marginalization. It can also reduce vulnerability to poverty and enhancing people's capabilities to deal with social risks. We insisted very much in week 7 on the concept of social risks. And you might want to tease out more really on how education can get to help people prevent some risks such as poverty, socioeconomic disadvantage, and even just how education can get to act as a social safety net. And there are even different ways of understanding education under that angle of social safety net, and even looking at it as another good, and a public good in particular. So education in that sense becomes not only, you know, a private or personal thing, but it is seen as a public policy tool, actually. And through this public policy tool, it can work as a form of social protection that can buffer individuals and communities against systemic risks. So in that sense, it's also recognized that lower education attainment might be linked closely to higher risks of poverty, socioeconomic disadvantage, and potentially even leading to other generational or intergenerational disadvantage. So there is this article published in The Lancet, which tries to link education too much to social determinants of health, and is really making the case as to how and why education, can be really linked to health and even well-being broadly. Really recommend you to have another look at this, and will provide more insights on how education can be understood through these angles. Now, having said that, we also have to recognize that education remains a contested and a politicized policy area, same as what we said for health policy. It is contested and even politicized because education and schools in particular are perceived as a controlled site for achieving societal goals and aspirations. So, the way education functions, the way the education system operates is in itself informed by, several decision-making processes. And these decision-making are quite informed by political ideologies and societal values and cultural norms and, even public perceptions on the types of graduates we want as a society, and the quality of individuals actually which should be produced through our education models. Different countries will have different priorities in terms of the type of individuals they want to produce. And I'm not speaking here only about the type of individuals in terms of skills individuals should get from education, but even broadly through the angle of the values the education should aim to impart to the people who are attending that education system. So different countries, different political parties will put forward, different proposals as to how they perceive education and what education should aim to achieve for the society. Some political ideologies we have spoken about in week 2 will be very important to your understanding of why certain political parties might take different and even opposing positions on the type of education we want and the types of individuals which should be trained through those education systems. So education also reflects a complex interplay of political agendas and the broader societal context in which ideas about knowledge, citizenship, equity, and even social roles are embedded. And again, all these will be quite conflicting because, again, different political parties, different actors in the society or in the community should have or will have differing political views about this as well. So in a sense, education is not neutral. So who we have in power will get to actually influence the type of education we get to give to our children. And we shall see this as we start speaking about who gets to influence the education system and in what context, as we start speaking about, all these in the next few recordings. But let's also mention that education remains a politicized, area of policy debate because there are ongoing politicized debates over curriculum content, resource allocations, and even the governance of schools and the education system as a whole And all these again will be involving different actors with different agendas. We see this very much often when there are debates in the media, which tend sometimes to even take the form of proxy battles, and reflecting deeper ideological conflicts related to culture, identity, and societal justice, social justice, if you like. And all these, again, you see controversies surrounding the debate around what should go on the curriculum. Things like, for example, teaching children about critical race theory or gender identity or sex education. You'll see a lot of debates ongoing as to at what age, for example, should we start teaching children about sex education, or, the national history of the country, and so on and so forth. Just to illustrate this, you'll see this article from The Conversation, written in 2021 by some of my colleagues, about how the Senate, for example, the Australian Federal Senate, got to reject, a proposal that was put forward about, including critical race theory to the national curriculum, and that has been rejected. So again, you see different, positions people get to take, even when it comes to deciding what should go onto the curriculum and what students should be taught in schools, and at what age in particular students could start being introduced to these complex ideas. So this is being also acknowledged in the reading of this week by Hinz, that there are dozens of school systems and a multiplicity of policy actors spread across state and Commonwealth levels of government, each driven by their own agenda. This uneasy policy settlement exists within Australia's equally complex, dynamic, and contested federal system of governance, which offers both challenges and opportunities for policymakers and advocates. So again, as we shall see in the next few recordings, there are many different actors intervening at different levels in the education sector. And this in itself makes education partly, an area of contest and an area of even proxy battles, and, an area of ongoing discussions, not only even among politicians, but even parents would be regarded as, having a say on what could go on the curriculum, or, how schools should function, and so on and so forth. Communities will have a say on that. Some schools will be run by faith-based structures, such as the Catholic Church, and that will tend to influence education in a certain way. So in a sense, I'm just introducing you to the idea of how education is contested and why, it is such a politicized area, and probably more politicized than all the other few policy debates, policy areas we looked at previously. And we shall see this in more details in the next few recordings. Thank you very much.